big part of everyone's life in one way or another, but I gotta be honest, these people that choose to insert race into every single aspect of their existence have always rubbed me the wrong way.
I don't date women who have sex with non-African men.
Not only do I think basing your entire thought process off of something you have no control over is just inefficient and overall just kind of sad, but I find that having this kind of mindset leads to a lot of infantilization, hypocrisy, and eventually complete delusion.
If you are an athlete, the way in which your worth is determined is identical to the way in which the worth of an enslaved African was determined.
FD Signifier and Dr. Umar Johnson are two people who are very different, but definitely revert every single thing back to the white supremacist capitalistic system.
Hip-hop is an agent of white supremacy.
So throughout this video, I'm going to use them as examples to prove that viewing every single thing in your life through a racial lens can cause you to become a fucking insane person. So let's get started.
Who the fuck are you? Excuse me.
FD Signifier is another one of my personal favorite socialist video essayists. You know the type. Incredibly smug, believes that all white people are inherently racist, not because of who they are as people or the decisions that they make, but because they take part in this system that is inherently racist. That system being capitalism or America or really whatever he wants to bitch about that day. You know, one of these people.
I'm a propagandist.
Well, no,
for the record.
I'm not calling
I'm a
you that.
propagandist.
I'm just saying. I'm going to
No,
play you.
I'm saying I am.
And for Dr. Umar Johnson, he's a lot. He's mostly famous for his like 15 spots on the Breakfast Club that all went viral, but he used to be a school psychologist and now he's like a Pan-African influencer slash speaker, I guess. And his new mission in life is to create his own Pan-African private school. We're gonna check in to see how that's going, but yeah, that's what he talks about a lot. And I personally would say that a lot of his views are batshit crazy.
Everything we invented is a permanent patent for Africans, and if you want to use it, you must pay us a percentage. So guess what? Anybody running lights, you paying black people. In addition to that, America has about 10 major exports: gold, oil, water, electricity. We get a 25% cut permanently.
But trust, we'll get into it throughout the video.
Bow, 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 bow.
In my opinion, one of the worst things that viewing everything through a racial lens leads to is the infantilization of you and your race. Just so you guys get where I'm coming from, my entire philosophy revolves around personal accountability. I believe that in America, the opportunity for success is always there, for the most part. Now, unfortunately, there are exceptions to that rule, and that's up. But if you're watching this video, let's be real. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about people like this guy.
Your dad wasn't around at all, or?
Nah, he was in prison, cuz. He was in prison. He went to prison for shooting my mom, cuz.
This guy's f***ed, and that's wrong. But for most of us, the opportunity is there. And if you have an issue in your life, it is your responsibility to fix that issue. Not because the world is fair and magic is real, but because it's in your best interest. And to be clear, I think the government should help out more. But in my opinion, they've proven over and over and over again that they are incompetent.
I don't remember.
So this leaves us all with two options. Option 1, try and improve your situation. Or option 2, don't try and have a life that is ass. And you know what can make that garbage life even worse? Having your identity stolen. That's why I'm so happy to have Aura be the sponsor of today's video. Aura is an all-in-one, easy-to-use solution that helps prevent digital threats from software. And it comes to give you we got blaming obvious statement.
The mythology of buying power has been used to
I choose to think this way not only because it's what the most successful people have always done, but because it gives you the opportunity to change what you want to change in your life. A lot of people are constantly blaming some sort of boogeyman for their life being shit, and I think even when that boogeyman is real and it is their fault, it's up to you to fix your life because no one is coming to save you, especially not anyone in this video. And things like learning about financial literacy or gaining a skill that's actually valuable in the market and the economy are great ways to immediately improve the quality of your life. But of course, some people are going to disagree with that objectively true and very obvious statement.
The mythology of buying power has been used to convince poor black people that we're poor because of our own failures, our own inability to take advantage of the wonders that we have in terms of opportunity here in the United States. It's a narrative that's meant to blame poor people for being poor. And to say, black people, you have all this buying power, and if you would just have financial literacy and stop buying rims and hair and weed, you would be rich and you could invest and buy land and buy stock and this and that. And then when you look at the numbers, there's no land to buy, there's no stock to buy, there's no wealth creating assets to invest in.
There's no wealth building assets to buy in the United States of America. Really? What kind of loser-ass mentality are you trying to instill in everybody's mind? You're actively telling people not to do things that will actually help them succeed in life. There is no world where if all black people started learning about money and investing where their lives would not dramatically improve. And if politics is your thing, that's beautiful, my friend. I just don't understand why you can't encourage people to do both. Why do you always have to prop one up by shutting down the other? I don't get that. Cause let's be real, what do you think is more applicable to a random black person's life? Hey, why don't you take these books and learn about financial literacy and saving? Or don't worry about making money and let's all galvanize and change the structure of the United States government. And that's the fundamental problem a lot of leftists have. We either fix the entire white supremacist patriarchal system or we do literally nothing. And look, if Dr. Ball here is talking about black people as a group and not as individuals, I'm sure we would all agree that there's not some singular investment that can save an entire race. But to act as if there's no way for black people to succeed under capitalism, I think is just disingenuous. It's become obvious to me that these are people who've become so zeroed into an ideology that they forgot their most important goal: to improve the lives of as many people as possible. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna be a little bit of a Candace Owens here for a second. Yes, black people do spend money on a lot of stupid shit. I know a guy who is a delivery driver for Domino's Pizzeria and drives a $50,000 Charger. I know at least 4 black people who drive luxury cars and cannot pay their rent. We all know you are a cashier at a Vons supermarket. You're not fooling anybody. Please stop. These are terrible life decisions. Obviously, it's not all of us, but let's be real, it's a lot of us. And if we stop spending on things that signal we have money and took the time to learn how to make real money, our lives would dramatically improve. And that should not be a polarizing statement. But not only is telling black people to save their money wrong, but saying that we need to look presentable when we go to the grocery store is also anti-black.
The double agent is an insidious figure among black conservatives because in many ways they have all the outward appearances of caring about black people and even some earn credibility for their work. But somewhere along the way, they begin to spout anti-black talking points that sound a lot like your typical conservative white person. But because they have this credibility, we don't recognize the harm in their words. So along with Cosby and Charleston White, we have Monique with her anti-bonnet crusade a couple of years ago.
An anti-bonnet crusade. Now that sounds pretty darn intense. I wonder what this agent of white supremacy actually said.
But I saw so many of our young sisters in head bonnets, scarves, slippers, pajamas, blankets wrapped around them, and this is how they're showing up to the airport. And I've been seeing it, not just at the airport, I've been seeing it at the store, at the mall. I've been seeing sisters showing up with these bonnets and headscarves and their slippers. And the question that I'm having to you, my sweet babies, when did we lose pride in representing ourselves? When did we step away of let me make sure I'm presentable when I leave my home?
I can't believe this piece of shit member of the black bourgeoisie would ask the descendants of slaves to brush their hair and put on pants before going to the grocery store. Doesn't this heifer realize how hard it is to brush my hair with the boot of white capitalism constantly on my neck, weighing me down? What's wrong with this? Yeah, I'm sorry. If you took offense to anything Monique said, you're a loser. Like you never had your grandma tell you to look presentable when you go outside? Like, who are these losers that are crying on the internet about this milquetoast statement? This has you stressed out, really? That an old black lady's like, yeah, we should dress up when we go to the store. You're like, oh my God, how could she say this? Oh my God, she's so anti-black. Like, what, so laziness is just embedded in blackness? Is that what we're saying? Black people aren't allowed to want to look good when we go outside. Like, having pride in your appearance is a Republican white thing now. Like, what are we talking about? Dramatic as hell for no reason. If you don't think that people are gonna judge you based on your appearance, you live in a fucking fantasy world, and you should never ever be able to operate a motor vehicle or use the internet without supervision. I don't know how we've become so fragile as a race where now telling grown adults to get dressed before going to the grocery store is now anti-black. Like, are we that weak? Are we that frail as a people? Like, what are we actually expected to do? Are we expected to feed ourselves, wipe our own asses, get to work on time? Like, what isn't connected to the white supremacist capitalistic system? What can we handle that isn't the fault of that?
Y'all niggas can't handle y'all shit.
Black people, I know things are tough right now, alright? But don't worry, everything is about to change for us because Dr. Umar is going to start a school for kids on purpose.
Now, you're actually trying to own your own school or buy your own school? Like, explain that to me.
The Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy is a school that I conceived of a very long time ago, but began to actually put teeth into the creation of that school a couple of years ago.
Now, you want the school to be strictly African in terms of overall its focus?
Yes, the concept, the foundation, will be Pan-African nationalism and the principles of African culture.
Okay, he's creating a Pan-African private school. That sounds like an admirable goal. I just wonder how he's going to pay for all this.
Donations, gifts.
Got it. Now, he did start taking donations for this school 10 years ago, but I'm sure things are going great. I mean, look at all these classes he's offering to the kids.
What is the curriculum going to look like?
In addition to your required math, science, language, and social studies, we're going to have financial and economic science. Critical. How to do your own taxes, real estate, international investments, business planning. We got financial and economic. We have dietary and nutritional, how to eat to live, a lot of your doctor saving type of information, how to take care of your woman, how to raise your children, how to be a leader in the community. And of course, there will be military and political science, if I didn't mention that. We do want to teach them survival skills, traditional African martial arts, both with and without weapons.
This seems so unbelievably realistic and not like a bunch of bullshit and lies. But again, where is the school at today? It's been 10 years and I want to see all these little T'Challas this man is constantly producing. I'm excited. Let's check it out.
Suck, nigga.
And it gets worse because he bought this building 5 years ago and there's still holes in the ceiling. The plumbing doesn't even work. He has taught 0 children, produced 0 mini T'Challas. How you can be this incompetent and have your fan base not completely turn on you is almost admirable. Almost. But you know who Umar, I'm gonna stop calling him doctor, Umar blames for this decade of failure? You. Black people. Unless you're not black, then just black people.
I'm gracious, but I'm not content, because I know y'all got a lot more to give me than some $250,000.
Nigga, please.
So what's been going on the past 3.5 years? Getting contractors who you can trust to help you with it. And contractors were not kind to us, man. They ripped us off, they scammed us, they stole out the building. So I said, let's go with some white folks. And guess what? Here we are, 90 days later, and the white contractors have gotten us to the finish line in 3 months versus 3 years waiting on our own people.
What you darkies couldn't accomplish in 3 years, the white man accomplished in 3 months. In class, what does that tell us? Black people are incompetent. It's almost poetic how somebody whose entire ideology is black brotherhood and all this immediately throws black people under the bus as soon as it's time for him to address his own monumental failures.
Y'all niggas are batshit crazy.
Another downside of viewing everything from a racial lens is that it causes you to have brain rot. And when you have brain rot, you say dumb shit like this.
If you have an option between sending your kids to a mediocre black school or the highest achieving white school in the state, the mediocre black school is where you should send your black child.
When I first heard this, I thought it sounded f***ing insane, and to be clear, I still think this is terrible advice. But if I'm being honest, I get where he's coming from here. Being the only other in terms of race can be a lot, especially on a kid. I wasn't the only black kid in my middle school, but there definitely weren't a lot of us. And I remember one time we were watching a movie, and this kid was microwaving a baked chicken. It wasn't even fried. And the entire class turned and looked at me. To be real, it wasn't the entire class. It was probably like 7 people, but it was still enough where the teacher was like, all right, calm down. We all know this black kid loves chicken, but let's get back to watching the movie. I bring that story up to say, when you're the only black kid or the only Asian kid or the only whatever in a class of whatever, you're going to have to deal with a lot of stuff like that. But my suggestion would be to teach people how to treat you. If people are talking crazy to you, you talk crazy back. And if people come to you with some BS, you check them until the point where they have to respect you. I know for a fact that growing up in an environment like that helped me to become funnier and caused me to gain thick skin. 2 things that have really helped me out in life. So as someone who went through what he's talking about, don't let anything or anyone stop you from getting the best education possible. These are the types of decisions that completely change the trajectory, big words, of your life. Can't let that shit just slide by because you're uncomfortable. That's insane. You have to chase being uncomfortable sometimes. Didn't you watch the Miles Morales movie? Like, come on, bro. Where were you at?
It is better for your children to not be the only black person that they know. And quick, type F in the chat if you were the only black person. Is it F? Should I say F? Whatever. Type F in the chat if you've had that only black person experience and it sucks and you'd have traded it in for the hood any day. Not the hood. You get my point.
I'm not going to act like the whole Carlton syndrome isn't a real thing, but if that's something you're worried about, you don't have to sacrifice your child's education. You can put them around black people in other ways. Join a youth group, go to church, put them around your black family. I just came up with that in like 4 seconds. But of course FD couldn't leave it there. He then goes on to talk about how he almost quit YouTube because he's black.
I was thinking about quitting because I wasn't sure if I was okay with the unintended consequences of my success. The fact is, if you're black and successful, that means you're probably finding that your peers and the people around you are starting to look less and less like you.
This is the definition of self-destructive behavior. Let me just throw away this amazing career that I've been working on for years because my peers are becoming less black. Ew. This is YouTube, so you get to choose who your peers are. No one is forcing you to make videos with Super Eye Patch Wolf in your mom's basement. If you want every FD signifier video to have the racial diversity of a Tyler Perry movie, no one is stopping you from doing that. And number 2, call me a coon, but I don't think your peers becoming less and less black is necessarily a bad thing. Hear me out. It makes sense that when you really zero in and become successful at something, that people of all different races are gonna start popping up in your life. And the reality that these racially obsessed people don't wanna admit is that you're probably gonna have a lot more in common with those people than the average person that kinda looks like you. I don't think that makes you a sellout or a coon. Now there's definitely a way to do it to be a sellout and a coon, but just because people start coming into your life that you connect with more, I don't think that necessarily makes you a bad person. Especially if it's not intentional. You're like, oh, I'm tired of these broke ass blacks. Let me get with the white man. It's like, no, maybe you just kind of like this guy more. He's super similar to you because you both dedicated your life to the same thing. So of course you're going to have similar interests. That just makes sense. Doesn't necessarily have to be a racial thing, but I feel like you're just kind of making this weird for no reason. Sorry to break it to Mr. FD Signifier, but you have way more in common with a Noah Samson than you do with the average black person. You have the exact same political ideology. You both make YouTube video essays that make me want to self-harm. You beef with the same people, and you're both incredibly unlikable. You're twinsies in all the ways that matter. So why would you be mad at gravitating to somebody you're way more similar to? Isn't that what human nature is all about? And just because you made it doesn't mean you have to turn your back on your community or the people you came up with. Why can't you just use your platform and your money to help bring people up with you instead of self-destructing like some self-hating loser ass?
I need to do a better job of keeping my eyes on the chat because I ignore it all the time, or I need like a notification sound because I had no idea anyone was there.
anime protagonist.
And suddenly you're managing how you're perceived and how said perception might affect your future opportunities. But also you're in negotiation with how you continue to try to relate to the black spaces that you still reside in and how those spaces might perceive you as you constantly go in and out of that space to travail through white spaces. You might wonder, are you being rewarded for your talent and hard work, or tokenized for your ability to go along and get along and not rock the boat too much? Is your success the fruit of your labor or the benefits for allowing yourself to be exploited?
Exploited? Exploited by who? The YouTube algorithm? I'm assuming he's talking about his white audience, but again, that's the great thing about YouTube. You get to pick who your audience is. So if you're tired of bending the knee to the white man or whatever bullshit you have in your head, you can just create content that caters to an all-black audience. There you go. Problem solved. Like, what is this weak, backwards ass way of thinking that these people always have? I really think viewing everything from this sort of lens gives you that weak ass mindset. But as unacceptable as that was, Dr. Umar, of course, has found a way to top him.
White culture is based on military science. That's how they've been so successful. White culture is totally based on military science. They never drop their guard around black folks, but they love to make black people think the guard had been dropped. Bill Cosby, perfect example. Look at all those white girls. He was taking care of them, giving them money, looking out for them. He thought that when they were behind closed doors, it was just about him and her. Not at all. She is always an agent of white supremacy, even when you're between her legs.
Imagine being so fucking crazy that your plan to show white people as these deceptive sociopaths is to bring up Bill Cosby's 100 and have Bill Cosby, the rapist, as the victim to these white women that he raped. Bill was just being his loving and attentive self, and these white snow bunny demons just decided to switch up on him. For what? A little bit of what's your problem, bitch? And this guy's supposed to be a psychologist. Remember that.
Rule number one, all white people are racist. I didn't say you gotta mistreat them. I didn't say you gotta hate them. You gotta understand them. That's all, brothers and sisters. When you see a pit bull dog, do you hate the pit bull? No. But you know that pit bull got some tendencies that you don't necessarily want to evoke, so you keep your distance from the pit bull. You don't hate the pit bull. I love snakes. I love snakes, but guess what? I know snakes got certain types of natural tendencies that I don't necessarily want to find myself on the wrong side of, so I keep my distance from the snakes. So I'm not telling you to hate white folks. I don't teach hate. I'm telling you to understand your enemy and know when your behavior needs to be adjusted so that you don't fall victim to the enemy. That's what I teach.
This is literally red pill ideology, except the common enemy is white people instead of women. I don't hate women. They're just these sociopathic demons that'll leave you and your family as soon as they have the opportunity to slightly upgrade their life. But I mean, there's no ill will. I would never. Me?
When I'm talking, shut the fuck up. All right? Like, I'm not one of your exes, one of these loser boyfriends you had before that let you talk over them. Shut the fuck up when I'm talking.
Yeah, I wrote a book called Why Women Deserve Less, but I don't hate women. This is just their nature. It's not their fault they're pieces of shit. Or I don't hate white people. I mean, they are evil sociopaths who will take from you in every single way humanly possible. But I mean, I don't hate them. That's just their nature. Pit bull, remember?
The next time a white person tells you that they are not a racist, your next question should be, what have you done to do away with the white privilege that you live off? How did you get rid of your white privilege? How?
Honestly, what's the correct way for a white person to answer that question? Well, golly gee, Kamal, I do understand that my white privilege sure is immense. That's why I'm currently taking a course on how I can become a better ally to my Afro-American brethren. It's a good thing that's a joke I just made up and not a real thing that FD Signifier unironically promoted on his YouTube channel. Thank God we don't live in that dystopian world.
I'm very pleased to announce that my first ever sponsor on this channel is not Raid Shadow Legends, but an organization that really aligns with much of what I want this channel to be. And that is an organization called Uplifting Impact, a Black-owned and woman-led diversity and inclusion organization trying to engage in important conversations and actions that seek to shift power to marginalized communities of all forms. One way that they do this is through their 3-day virtual summit, How to Be an Ally. It's an event for people who want to learn a positive, healthy framework for diversity, equity, and inclusion-related allyship.
Black people are literally anyone. Imagine if your friend came up to you and said that they spent $200 on a 3-day internet summit on how to become a better ally to
Thank you. The thing I will say is this one was a good exercise in reminding me not to be so dogmatic, so strict on like certain rules that I have in my mind, because the sun was basically right here where my head is, like maybe there. That's where the sun was. So I was almost shooting into the sun, which I would is one of those like rules in my mind that I would try and avoid, or try and adhere to the rule of like not shooting into the sun. But this is a perfect case of, well, it kind of actually worked out. Like the sun still, even in this shot, is sort of, it's closer to the horizon. If I can, it's like there. Again, I probably typically would have shot it when the sun was sort of hitting the facade directly, which I'm sure would have been compelling, but yeah, like it turned out okay, and it sort of accentuates the curvature and sort of the architecture on this side. So yeah, good little testament to not always following the rules super strictly, if that makes sense.
to your race. Would that strengthen your relationship with that person, or would it destroy your relationship with that person? I know my answer, but I'd love to hear from you guys down below. You spent $200 on a class on how to be cool with black people? That's weird. That tells me you're incredibly uncomfortable around black people.
If you tell me that you're about to do some investing with a white man, I can tell you that at some point in that relationship, unless you are extremely careful, and you can never be too careful because they control the entire legal apparatus.
The entire legal apparatus. Got it.
At some point, you're going to get manipulated out of your holdings because white people don't share power with black folks. You are out of your African mind if you think you're going to enter into a lifelong partnership.
I know more than one professional shooting on that the Samyang 24mm tilt shift, because I think the Canon one might be like $2,000 or $3,000, which is prohibitively, frustratingly expensive. But yeah, I know people working professionally who use that Samyang one, SAMYANG, their 24mm tilt shift, and are super happy with it. It's not going to be as good, but for the most part, and I feel like these days people are sort of leaning into lenses with more flaws and more personality in them anyway, so it could hypothetically even work more to your advantage than anything.
Shit with a white person.
All these pieces of shit, Fresh and Fit, Fox News, Hassan, Mr. Umar, they all do the same thing. First, create a common enemy that your audience already isn't really feeling like that. You demonize and dehumanize them constantly, tell lies about that common enemy, making your audience even more anxious, hateful, or fearful, leaving them to go to you for constant answers and updates about how to get rid of this awful feeling that you have created. It's the same formula over and over and over again. I don't know how people don't catch on. Well, actually I do, because these sociopaths just leverage people's emotions and tell them what they want to hear so that they can keep making money off of them. That's why we live in a world where grown adult men take dating advice from Fresh Prince CEO.
What percentage of college women do you think are being flown around the world? I want to hear from all
If
three
I
of
had
you.
to argue,
I want to hear.
off of like probability wise, if I argue,
Maybe like 30, 40, 50?
Holy shit. You know, that's a video for another day. Now, clearly, Umar has a problem with the whites, but when it comes to white women, this guy really gets unhinged.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Umar. Are you totally against interracial relationships?
I am totally against it, and I want to make sure you understand why. I would argue the reason black men marry white women is because they wish they were white themselves, and having the white man's prize, his queen, is a psychological symbol to myself that I am equal to him. So you can't be in love with white women and not at the same time feel inferior to white male. Black men can only date the white women that white men do not.
I think it goes without saying, I think this shit is stupid. I will agree, there's a lot of people who are out here idolizing and fetishizing other races because they have no self-worth. Anytime I see a black dude, or anyone from any race really, that's like, uh-oh, snow bunny season, where's my white queen at? Or uh-oh, looks like I got that yellow fever, I'm trying to find me a Mikasa-san. Where's my waifu? That is troglodyte behavior. You're no longer a part of the functioning society. You need to step on over to the gulag and get to work. That person is a loser, but I realize that not every single person who's in an interracial relationship is that guy. But Umar disagrees.
Dr. Umar, my brother loves white women. How can I redeem him? Don't redeem him. Release him to the bunny brigade. Don't save the snow bunny lover.
Sure, he took like $5 million in donations and there's no school and spent 10 years, but I mean, look at you dating a Mexican. What are you, trying to destroy black people forever? Why don't you just reincarnate MLK and
Tucker Carlson is autistic.
Why don't you just do that? But my question to Mr. Umar is, if marrying a Korean girl is gonna destroy the fabric of the black community, how is marrying Sukihana, the human minstrel show, even on the table?
So could you make Sukihana a wifey? Talk about that as well too, man.
I don't know. She and I had never spoke. She obviously would have to make some radical transformations. You know, I have a lot of young people who look up to me all over the world, African children, teenagers, elementary school, middle school. I have more young followers than any other black personality in the world.
This man really just said unironically that he has more fans than any other black personality in the world. We're just letting that slide. Zero pushback on that statement, right? Okay.
And I'm very responsible towards them. And, you know, for me to come out with her, she would have to renounce nearly everything she does and reinvent herself. I don't think she's at that point right now. When she gets to that point, if I'm still available, meaning I don't have my 2 wives yet, then we can have that conversation at that time.
Those of you who are blessed enough to not know what a Sukihana is, let me fill you in. Sukihana is an OnlyFans hellspawn sent here to destroy humanity by making the worst entertainment possible. She is a rapper but doesn't know what the word musician means.
You're a musician. But that's why I'm interviewing you today, so I can get to know you.
So I'm a musician. What the fuck that mean? Make magic or something? What is musician?
I think you're confusing that.
Yeah, I'm not no musician. I make music.
And she says she loves black people, but she has a video with Sexy Red of both of them twerking, eating fried chicken in front of a Popeyes, talking about sucking green and their baby daddies killing people.
I'm very pro-black, so I care about my people. Yeah, I'm not no musician. I make music. I care about my people.
I guess I'm just a little bit confused on why she has potential, but all interracial relationships doomed from the start. It just feels a little odd to me.
You better finish strong, or I'ma get in that ass.
When it comes to wrapping up this video, I want to focus on 2 things. First, the people. For Mr. FD Signifier, I do think he's incredibly smug, arrogant, dramatic, and kind of weaselly. But I also think he's incredibly knowledgeable, passionate, and that he genuinely does care about black people and black issues. And I want to say I really have learned a lot from watching his videos, and that I genuinely want to thank him for that. For realsies. No sarcasm. Now for Dr. Umar, let's start off with the nice stuff, because it's gonna be mostly negative. He did get his doctorate. That is impressive. We have to give him credit for that, even though the doctor in the cult did say that it is the easiest doctorate to get. We have to give him credit. And I genuinely do think it's a good thing that he's drawing attention to how easily these kids are being prescribed pharmaceutical drugs. So, you know, kudos and shit. On the other hand, Mr. Umar clearly has serious issues with the whites. The dating standards are insane. The Bill Cosby stuff is insane, and obviously I think the school is a scam. Because even if the school does open, in my humble opinion, there's no way that someone who's been taking donations for 10 years and has taught 0 children said the school would be up and functioning by 2019 at the latest, and 5 years later doesn't even have a working bathroom. Someone who, when confronted about why after 10 years nothing has really been done, immediately shifts the blame to the community he said he's here to help. I just don't think that person is capable of running a private school. Call me crazy. Now that we got those two out of the way, let's talk about why I think it's bad to view everything through this racial lens. I'm not making this video to say that racism is dead or anything like that, but if I'm being honest, I do think we focus on race a little too much. The truth is, when it comes to experiencing racism in modern times, you don't know. Was that person being shitty because they're an asshole, or were they being shitty because they hate black people? Most of the time, it's impossible to tell. Back in the day, it was very obvious. A while back, my grandma told me a story when she was walking to work with her white friend, and some lady threw boiling water at her and called her the hard R. And that was in the 80s. But now we're at a point where, like yesterday, for example, 2 of my coworkers were convinced this lady was racist because they tried to take a plate of food off of her table, and she just kind of put her hand down and said no. And our manager, who is black, was like, well, she was sitting with a black guy. And they're like, so that doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, really? You think you're kind of jumping to conclusions here? The reality of the situation is this lady sucks. Those are the facts. Or at least she did a thing that made her shitty in my eyes. That's all you really know. But when you're like, oh, she's racist, she's this, she's sexist, you're just guessing. Now you're all emotional off of information that you don't even really have. She doesn't care. She's moved on. She's still able to eat her little baked chicken or whatever was on her stupid ass plate. You're the one that's in the back all upset because you feel like you went through some racist traumatic experience, when you probably didn't. The reality is that someone did a thing to you that you didn't like, and you jump to a conclusion that you've been conditioned to jump to. And all I'm saying is that jumping to that conclusion for every issue you have is gonna do nothing for you but drive you crazy and make you miserable. And to be crystal clear, I'm not saying that when something inherently racist does happen that you need to just take it with a smile because you can never offend the white man. Stand up for yourself, because fuck those people, 100%. But let's stop making every single issue something or someone else's fault, because I guarantee you, you'll be the only one to suffer.
Minecraft 1.21, the long-awaited update with all of its amazing stuff, which I've laid out right here that we're going to take a look at today, right here, right now. Some of these things may even...
It doesn't fit. I think he tried to play it off like, oh, I was thinking of some other terrorist attack or some shit like that.
Militias. I have an entire bookcase on modern Palestine.
To set up and then 10 years. There's evidence of that they've been cataloging.
And engaging in collective punishment.
Plan D, like that was them just being defensive, them prepping, them making sure that there was, prepping for an offensive of all the neighboring Arab countries. And that was kind of like their reasoning for Plan D.
I don't think there was a reasoning for Plan D, no. I'm not sure how long ago you heard me say that or if that's exactly what I said, but the contentious issue around Plan D is the Arab narrative is that Plan D was basically something that they'd thought about decades before, and that the mass expulsion of every Palestinian or every Arab that was living in what would become Israel needed to be expelled. My position is that Plan D was probably a little bit more dynamic than that, and it evolved out of a response to all of the aggression of the neighbors, and then it became like we need to expel these people from our newly forming country.
Neighbors when? So I can get an idea of your mindset on that.
I mean, probably like 47 onwards.
Because they had been working on that plan for around 10 years. There's evidence of that they had been cataloging militants who actually fought early on in other wars in World War I, right, 1916. They had cataloged, and they had been cataloging every village, every person that fought in militias. So Liam, historian Liam O'Mara talks about this, which is the one I wanted to bring on with me. But yeah, he talks about this a lot, which is that there was evidence of them cataloging all of these militants for pretty much like a decade before. So unless they were inherently just defensively prepping a decade before because of their neighbors, most evidence does show that they were there to expel the Palestinians.
Wait, real quick, one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So when you say there's evidence of them working on plans in advance, that's not surprising at all to me. I don't think that's strong evidence in favor of the idea that there was always going to be a mass expulsion of Arabs. People work on contingency plans for all sorts of things. I'm sure we've got like different plans relating to how we would nuke certain people. It doesn't mean we're planning to nuke certain people. Yeah, I don't think that's a convincing argument to say that was always the plan. And then I would always ask, and I've never gotten a satisfying answer to this, if the plan was always mass expulsion of all of the Arabs living in Israel, why did Israel accept the 47 partition plan?
Yeah, so this is something Ben-Gurion had talked about multiple times, which is there's multiple quotes of him, and then there's evidence of him cataloged in New York, I think in the 50s, early 50s, where he states, we will take any percent we get, and we won't stop there. That is just our ability to set up and then continue further. That had been quoted many different times in many different capacities over the years. So that's why when people overlook that, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to say like, hey, and this is what they said, like, if we get 2%, we take it, and then we will develop ourselves, we will build ourselves up, and we will continue to grow. And so that's a satisfying answer. There's evidence of that. Liam O'Mara, I'll bring him on, and we'll go over all the evidence to support it, so I don't want to ever say anything that's not supported by actual evidence. But that was their goal, is to accept anything and then from there move forward. So this idea of like, well, they said yes, so like clearly they were satisfied completely, and that's evidence to show that they were fully satisfied with the land that they were given. I wouldn't agree with that either. You couldn't say, well, they accepted it. Clearly they didn't want anything else. That's not true.
Well, no, I mean, again, different claims, stronger claims, precise claims. So if your claim is that the Jews always wanted more land, I'm not going to disagree with that. I think the goal or the aspiration would have been all of mandatory Palestine and maybe even more, right? That's probably the aspiration. But the question is like, what would they have done absent any Arab aggression? Like, were they always going to conquer all of that land? I don't think that's ever, I don't think it's even possible to demonstrate that because there's never been an absence of Arab aggression towards the Jews.
But I mean, this idea of like, since there's no evidence of it, there's no way that they would.
Yeah, correct. This one was 100% natural art. I would say probably 80 to 90% of my work these days is almost exclusively natural art. I prefer it for very obvious reasons, but then I'm very fortunate that a lot of the trends at the moment sort of lean that way. But I'm sort of getting the hint that things are maybe pushing back a little bit more towards some artificial light stuff from people who really want to sort of stand out and that sort of thing.
Would do it. It was their plan from the beginning. So when they had discussed it, and then your point was like, well, we don't know. But if someone's saying it, and then your response is like, but we don't know. They could have not. Sure, I guess. You know what I mean?
So
like,
the evidence of that, so the counter evidence of that would be that because Israel was the only Jewish country and because they are fighting for their survival, Israel has two arms of how they figure out what their path into the future looks like. They've got the military arm and they've got the political arm. And regardless of whatever Israeli aspirations must be, they have to reconcile with the political realities that exist around them. Surrounded by a bunch of neighbors that aren't attacking them or aren't doing anything aggressive, it's hard to imagine that they would have had international support or even maybe internal support to just like conquer peaceful neighbors. I don't think that I don't think they could have sustained that. So if the claim is, well, Ben-Gurion or early Israeli leaders had dreams or aspirations of controlling all of Mandate Palestine, I would say, yeah, of course. But that's not really the question because like everybody has dreams of controlling tons and tons of territory. The question is...
But wouldn't that contradict what you're saying in the very fact that they did it and they conquered land while all the Arab nations were around them from the beginning? So to say like, oh, well, but there's all these Arab nations around them, like they wouldn't do that. They literally did that. That's how they got there in the first place. That's how they expanded in the first place.
But it was always in response to Arab aggression. So like absent that aggression, would they have
What do you mean? Them migrating in 1896 was because of Arab aggression? How?
No, not that. I'm not talking about the migrations and the land purchases, but I mean, those were purchases of land from the owners of the land, from tenant Arab owners.
What percent of the land? Because this is something. Do you know what percent of the land they owned and bought right before 1948 when they were given the 40-something percent, 50%?
I'm pretty sure the majority of the land that they bought I think from the Ottoman Empire from before 1920.
Yeah, but do you know what percent of Palestine, what percent of the land did they actively own when they were given roughly 50% of the land?
Well, they were never given 50% of the land, but I'm not sure what percentage. I have no idea. Probably a little amount, like 10 or 15 or 20. I don't know, something like that.
4%. So they owned 4%, and then they went from, hey, now we're going to give you in 1948. This is
wait. Can you show me this? You said they. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see. We were just talking about it, and I think it's in one of the books I have too here. But that's why I wanted to bring them on to actually cite everything accurately, because I wanted people to actually look into it, because I'm a stickler for being dead accurate. Let's see. But that's something that, I'll bring it on. I'll send it to you if I can't find it right now, because I want to be very factual and I don't want anyone to be misled, because that's really important to making decisions on what's happening. But yeah, so they own roughly 4% of the land. So to go from 4% of the land to getting the 1948 partition, there was a huge disruption, right? So like my grandmother and my entire family was expelled. So my family was killed in 1948. All our friends, our villages, everything was destroyed at that time. And they owned literally roughly 4%. So if you could find something, let me know. I'm watching it to see just in case. But yeah, the legal ownership about 5%, right? Yeah, 5.6.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it doesn't have to be like land in between. This is like explicitly like the small pieces of land that they actually own. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that one they actually bought, right? And so this is the thing, is like when you're going from 4 to 5% to roughly 50% in this partition, you're disrupting clearly hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of thousands of millions of people. And so this idea of like, well, they were just satisfied with this small amount and they would not take over more. I mean, they literally jumped from around 5% to around 50%.
Well, that you keep saying, hold on, wait. Let's be clear. Hold on. You keep saying they jumped. Okay. So when we're looking at this land,
they didn't purchase the land, right? They didn't purchase roughly 50% of the land.
Sure, because it's probably like this is probably like empty area. Is going to be my guess, right? The majority of Mandate Palestine, when I say empty, I mean like undeveloped. It's not like there's not like a ton of people living like scattered throughout these huge cities and these areas that aren't purchased. It's probably mostly barren land, would be my guess.
I mean, well, it's not actually. So take a look at the part of the land that they were given. They were given, most of the coast.
Hold on. You keep saying this given. They weren't given anything. There was a partition plan that was trying to divide up for the like where both peoples would live, and that was rejected. So
rejected by who?
Well, by the Arabs.
Okay, and then who said yes to it? So when I say given, that is a dead accurate word. When the people you're taking from are saying no, and then it's given to the other people, it is literally given.
Sure. You keep saying taken from. So when you talk about how much land the Jews owned, like it's not like the Palestinians owned any of this land either. There was no Palestinian fund that was purchasing any of this land. This was like mandatory Palestine, right? It was essentially ran by the British.
I have, well, no. So that's not true. So I have paperwork dating from the 1920s of homes that we've purchased in places in Palestine. So yes, they did own. I'm not saying every single inch.
Well, you said you have paperwork in the 1920s. So who was that bought from who?
I can look it up.
If you've got paperwork in the 1920s, that's going to be bought from Britain. It's not bought from. There's no country in Palestine you bought it from. That's it. Like the administrators of the land are going to be British, right?
Yeah. So during that time, it's the administrators of the land. But my point is that they owned the land.
Well, owning. I don't know if owning the property is the same as owning the land. It might be. Like I can grant that maybe, but like.
Well, not even that too. This is the issue of like Britain taking over and taking it as if like the Palestinians were like, yeah, feel free, like take over our area and control it, right? That in itself was an invasion. Right, Sykes-Picot Agreement, and going back against the Arabs, against the Husseini McMahon coalition, to kind of backtrack and say like, oh, never mind, we're actually going to divide up this land, we're going to take control of it, and we're going to kind of.
So in that Hussein McMahon correspondence, there was no explicit guarantees of anything. They've never had explicit guarantees of everything. And when you say that the land was like owned by Britain and that was like an invasion, I mean kind of, but the Ottoman Empire collapsed. There was no more Ottoman Empire. There were like multiple great powers that collapsed after World War I. So, absent the Ottoman Empire, who's going to run the land? Of course, it's going to be whoever
Yeah,
I guess
who runs the land? But let's just say if the Palestinians bought it, let's say from Britain, right? If that's the paperwork, and you're saying Britain would have the right to then take it from them and give it to
No,
who
Palestinians never bought the land from Britain. That never happened. They might have owned property there or whatever. The Palestinians never bought land.
Okay, let's say own property.
Sure.
So for those who own property and lost it in the partition plan, what do you say to that? Because I want to be specific about
that. I mean, that would be tragic.
Like we have land. I have 21 acres that now is there's a prison on it in Israel that is my family's land. We have all the paperwork for it. It's 21 acres, something like that. That was taken from us and then given to them. So this idea of like taken and given, yes.
Wait, well, you keep saying taken and given, but nobody agreed to the partition plan, so it didn't. Or I mean, like the partition plan didn't go through. So the land that they have now was won in war in '48, right?
Yes, but when you're going, okay, so there's two things. After World War I or after World War II, everyone kind of agreed like we're not going to be kind of shifting land like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you say like, oh, it wasn't taken, then how did they acquire it? Did my family give it to them? Did they buy it from us?
I think that's like that's why it's such a complicated question, right?
Yeah.
Because like in '67, for instance, because people always talk about the '67 borders, if Israel were to give back the West Bank and give back Gaza, who are they giving it back to?
You're saying back to 1967 borders?
Yeah, who would they be giving the West Bank and giving the Gaza Strip back to?
In terms of control or like the physical land? Which
either one.
Giving it back to the people.
Yeah, so like that doesn't. No, like people don't own land, right? It's states typically own land. So in '67, when they say give the land back, they say to the Palestinians, but the Palestinians never had that land. The West Bank would have gone back to Jordan, and the Gaza Strip would go back to Egypt.
Okay, but there's a difference between like individual land ownership of like my family has paperwork, mortgage on land that they owned in Palestine pre-1948. So like we own that land. Now, sure, Jordan can control the area, Britain can control the area. That's fine. But that administrative paperwork would then get passed to someone else. Like, okay, so now that let's say Jordan, now that we're in control of the West Bank, which Palestinians live where? Well, here's our paperwork. This is the land that we own. You know what I mean? So
sure. I don't know what the ordinary process is. If you were like part of Austria-Hungary, or if you were part of like any mandatory area, like if that state collapses, I don't know in terms of how do people honor old paperwork, or do they compensate you for it, or whatever. I don't think that par for the course has ever been all the people go back to where they had paperwork from the original country and then live there. I don't think that's ever happened. Right?
No. I mean, look, we're setting a precedent that's never, frankly, gonna happen, right? Like this is never gonna happen where Israel's gonna go like, all right, you give it back. How do we even organize to know who owns what?
Sure.
But it's very similar in the sense of like what we did with the Native Americans, which whether it's good or bad, kind of at least putting these programs in place to support. Again, whether they're good or bad, or whether they're like good, like enough or not enough, but putting in these systems to be like, okay, these are people that were displaced. My family was displaced. We did have a home. We did have a business. My entire family had businesses. How do we fix that? If we went in there and we took it and they kicked us off of it, how do we fix that? How do we make sure that that's supplemented to be like, okay, at the very least, here's some money. At the very least, here's this, here's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good questions, and I think that there's been an attempt to reach a settlement on those questions in prior negotiations, but I think the issue is from the Palestinian side, nothing except for like full unconditional right of return for all recognized refugees of that number, which is 6 million plus right now, is acceptable. So there is no just compensation or anything absent everybody going back to where they lived before. So
I mean, in an ideal world, okay, well, I mean, we can go back and we'll come back to this, but like, so my whole stance is that evidence strongly shows that the intention was to continue to take the land over and over again.
Yeah, but hold on. When we speak about intentions, we have to be a little bit more sophisticated when we're talking about countries, right? So like intentions are going to dynamically change as situations progress. So somebody might have an intent to do a particular thing, but confronted with another thing, that intention doesn't matter anymore. It's going to change, right? And I think that there is clear examples, there's clear evidence in Israeli history where their intention for taking land disappeared. They didn't want any more land because they were worried about aggression from neighbors and their inability to even hold what they had. Like there were times, I think it was 48. During that war, where they were aware of the demographic issues in the West Bank. And I think that a lot of the advancing of the military stopped because Ben-Gurion and other Israeli leaders were like, we can't do this. This is untenable. And even in 67, when Jordan was coming into attack after that conflict began, after Israel bombed the Egyptian airfields, Israel told Jordan, like, please don't attack. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. And Jordan decided to anyway, and then that's when they lost the West Bank. So, I mean, like, these are examples where it's like, well, if Israel wanted all that land, I imagine they would just go and take it all.
But you answered something very important, which you said, like, they don't really have the population for it. They don't have enough resources for it to continue. Mm-hmm. So what did they do in lieu of that? Are they
wouldn't do it typically, usually, right? But
are they slow? Here's what they're actually doing, right? Are they slowly allowing people who have never stepped foot in Israel, who have some magical connection to the land from thousands of years ago, which frankly, as you, I believe you're non-religious too, know that we all were there at some point, right? We all came from certain parts together because we all evolved from one area. Mm-hmm. So this idea of like, hey, along the way, they stopped there for a little bit, and so now we're going to claim that that's ours forever and eternity. So this ideology of like, some guy who's literally never been there, his family's never been there for thousands of years, can come in and say, hey, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take it. So what is Israel doing? They're allowing these people to come in little by little to expand their population. Yeah. They're allowing the hilltop youth to go into the West Bank and to build settlements little by little. Mm-hmm. They're doing, when you say like, what's their intention? Do we know if they want to continue? We do know. The settlements are active proof of that. Now, where you're right,
hold on, wait. We got to be really careful on timelines. Because 67 onwards, I think that Israel wanted the West Bank and they wanted to start to do that. And obviously, from 2000 and onwards, the goal has been the slow encroachment of more and more settlers, more demographic majority, more annexation of the West Bank. Yes. That's undeniable. Yeah.
Yeah, so what you're saying is the only thing you don't have proof for is between 48 and 67, there could have been this period where they wanted to slow it down. But the evidence of after 67 and before 48, all of it shows that they want to continue to take Palestine. So this idea that like, okay, maybe they shifted for a little bit. I mean, sure.
Well, it's not that they shifted, and it's not like, well, this happened. Like big things happened in 48. Sure, all the Arab states went to war to try to get rid of. Yeah.
But they can pause their intention. You're saying as if like they decided, you know what? Scratch everything. We don't want it all. We're content here and we'll be content here forever. What it seemed like logically is, hey, right now we don't have the ability to expand. Right now we don't have the ability to take on more land. And in 67 and moving forward, as people started migrating back in again, as everything started to calm down, it was great. Let's get back to our original plan. So this idea of like, you're playing this game of like, we don't really know their true intentions and they're going to change and they're very dynamic when the intention from this get-go was to take it all. The intentions from 67 onwards was to take it all.
It's just too naive of you. I think that from 48 onwards, I think what Israel wanted was Israel was wanting all of the mandatory Palestine area. They knew that realistically they couldn't do that for a variety of reasons. But like, what's the saying? Like, try me or whatever. Basically, given the opportunity to expand, if their neighbors make mistakes, they will. And I think that's what we saw happen over and over and over again, was their neighbors were incapable of using diplomacy. They were way too bent on constant war and aggression. And as a result of those military and diplomatic missteps, they lost huge tracts of land in that process of going to war, trying to eliminate an enemy, and then losing those wars. Now, because truly the question would be, is absent the Arab aggression, would Israel have continued to conquer land? I'm not convinced that that would be the case because of the deals that Israel did accept leading up to most of these wars.
But that's a ridiculous statement to say. Like the only reason that they're encroaching on West Bank right now is because Arab aggression. Otherwise, they would have been perfectly content.
Wait, what do you mean?
Because the idea that like taking West Bank is going to somehow stop Arab aggression is completely incorrect.
Well, that was the whole point. The point was because it's a huge buffer then. There are a ton of times you read Israeli historians, they use this phrase, and they used it a lot in the 40s and 50s, the rib cage of Tel Aviv. The idea that there were scant a few kilometers between the shores of the Mediterranean and where the West Bank territory was an incredibly frightful thing for them, right? You can shell the Tel Aviv literally from the West Bank. So after 67, this war happens, you get invaders from this area who continue to try to eliminate you as a country. Yeah, I think the argument for taking this territory and having it as like a buffer, whether it's mean or not, like it makes sense, right?
Why does a buffer ironically stop at the West Bank borders?
Because the River Jordan. What do you mean? There's a river there. That's where it would naturally end, right?
They can't get on the other side of the river?
Well, they could.
Wouldn't having a buffer on the other side of the river help significantly?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't matter.
North into Lebanon or south?
Wait. Hold on. Well, some of the things you're talking about are true. Some of the things you're talking about are not true. So having a buffer on the east side of the river, it would be very difficult to defend because now your supply lines have to stretch over that Allenby Bridge. There's a bridge over River Jordan. Yeah. So one, you'd have to be supplying past the river, so that's already more complicated. And then two, you'd be crossing into Jordan territory proper, which would be a lot more of an instigation. So that didn't make sense to cross past River Jordan. And then secondly, you mentioned, well, what about up in Syria? Well, the Golan Heights.
Hold on. But why more of an instigation? Isn't West Bank an instigation of itself? Why? Again,
no, wait, hold on. No, it's not an instigation. It's not, because Jordan never owned properly that territory. They conquered that territory in 48.
You're saying that their encroachment into West Bank right now is not causing contention in the Middle East?
Not with Jordan, no.
Jordan is playing a different game because of obviously their relations with it, so there's that.
Sure, but Jordan is also 2/3 Palestinians, right? I mean, Jordan is the most Palestinian country besides Palestine, so...
Yeah, no, 100%. But the thing is it's ironically going to the exact borders that they had wanted from the start.
Well, but I mean, like, but it's the exact borders from the start weren't arbitrary. The exact borders from the start kind of make sense that like you draw borders along like rivers and stuff, right? When Israel conquered down the peninsula,
what's the river between Lebanon and Palestine?
The river between Lebanon and Palestine, I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go and look at the border up there, but I know like the Golan Heights, the expansion to that was also a geographical expansion, right? The reason why they expanded the Golan Heights is because you could shell into Israel from those heights.
There's definitely a mixture of obviously like military, advancement of like having certain places. But this idea of like now you're trying to point of like, look, they're not taking it to take it. They're only doing it for their safety. While they've said over and over again before Arab intervention, before Arab attacking, that they wanted to take it all. And then now you're shifting it to like, nah, they're only taking it for just their safety. Their safety the only reason that they are in this position in the first place is because they came in and started taking land from Palestinians or started encroaching and expanding and pushing out Arabs and basically working with themselves and only hiring Jewish people and only buying from Jewish people and slowly expanding.
Well, so firstly, they didn't only buy from Jewish people. They bought from a lot of the Arab landowners. That's where the majority of the land was purchased from.
No. I mean like goods and services to prop up Jewish businesses.
Well, I think they would buy. I'm pretty sure they would trade with Arabs as well, but Arabs wouldn't trade with them.
If they needed to.
Well, but Arabs wouldn't trade with them. They wouldn't even recognize that as a country, right? From post 48, they wouldn't recognize it as a country. as a country, right?
Before that, I'm talking in the 1916. 1910, 1916, 1920, 1912.
I don't know what the status of trade was in the early 1900s, in the early 20th century. I'm not sure if they would or wouldn't. But also, when you mention like only hiring Jewish laborers too, I mean, like it's an idea of like conquest of labor from Jews, secular Zionism or labor Zionism. But also, isn't that probably better? Like, would it have been better if Jewish people were hiring Arabs to work for them on land that they had bought from them? That seems like people would then accuse them of like slavery or indentured servitude. Sorry.
No, because Jewish people at the time, let me give the exact number. I think there was 13,000 Jewish people, 400,000 Arabs in 1890, around there, maybe 1910, somewhere around there. I might be off a little on that.
Sure,
but they lived there working among Arabs, right? So Jewish people lived there, worked jobs. My grandmother, her great-grandmother, I sat and talked with her. I just did an interview with my best friend's grandmother from the same town as my grandmother. They're like, yeah, we lived with Jewish people. My grandmother was friends with Jewish people. They worked with us. They did this. So to come in and change the status quo of like, we're all living together to this is a Jewish compound and we're basically going to buy and kick out Arabs and we're going to expand. It doesn't set a nice precedent for the neighboring areas, the neighboring tribes, the neighboring villages.
Sure. I agree that like, I think that the British mandate and them promising Jews the ability to set up a homeland in there, I think that was probably a big mistake on the British side of things. But I mean, none of the fingers ever seem to get pointed at Britain.
Have you read the letters from the generals and the people on the ground in Palestine at the time, sending back to Britain about like that whole conquest? It was 1936, I think.
36. They're talking about the Peel Commission. Well, Peel.
No, before that, there was basically letters. It's really interesting. This is not even like a debate part, but it's very interesting to read what these like military leaders in Palestine who were in control of like Mandate Palestine at the time were writing about the situation and the land. And they were all actually like arguing of like they didn't know how to divide up the land and they didn't know what part to give to Palestine, things like that. But my whole issue is that like coming from day one, it was the expansion, the exclusion of Arabs, right? Kicking them out basically, whether you bought it or not, right? You're kicking them out. You're only hiring Jewish people. You're trying not to work with Arabs unless you have to, unless you need to survive, and slowly expanding. So the neighboring tribes and the neighboring villages understood what was happening. It was very clear what was happening is that they were going to slowly take over and they were going to expand. And so as they started to go, and then this is something that we talk about in one of the books, I think Anita Shapira talks about this, but basically they started to encroach on actual Palestinian villages and things like that around the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and all these different places and starting to expand. And this is where all that contention started building up.
Sure. But I mean, like, you have to understand the foundationally, and I guess this feels bad, but foundationally, the sound that I get when we have this conversation is that there was a country of Palestine that the Palestinians owned and the Jews invaded. But that isn't really what happened. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. Britain had a mandate to administer to this territory, and through that administration, a lot of Jews came in, and the people that lived there understandably felt shitty. But I mean, like, the same mandate system is what led to the creation of basically every single other like neighboring country, right? Iraq came from a mandatory system. Jordan, Transjordan to Jordan came from that. Like all of these other, like, that's just, Britain was the one running that territory, and by the end, the expiration of the mandates, they would turn it over to whatever stable governments had basically emerged from the territory. But I mean, like, it sucks if you were a Palestinian and you got kicked out of there. I definitely think that that's a shitty thing. It wasn't ultra abnormal in the world. I mean, you have, like, I'm pretty sure I think the Armenian genocide was around 1920. You had the huge transfer between like
typical,
Turkey
but it doesn't
and
make it normal or right.
Sure, I understand. I'm not saying it makes it normal or right. It's definitely a shitty thing. It's complicated for how should it have played out in terms of, like, should Britain have allowed anybody to move there or not? That's again complicated. I feel like the overpromising between the Balfour Declaration.
It didn't matter. They were migrating before, right? They were migrating. That was just more of like they were migrating before.
I don't think much migration really happened until that Balfour Declaration came in place.
No, there was a good amount actually from 1880 to 1916.
I think from 1880 to 1916, your first two aliyahs, the first one I think was like a total failure. I think the second one had a few more people come in because there was a bit more funding, but I think it was especially after 1917 you had a lot of people that started to come in.
For sure more. Let's see. It increased double double the population from 1880 to 1900.
Double the Jewish population, though?
Yes.
Yeah,
the number of Jews began to increase during late Ottoman Empire, increasing from 24,000 to 50,000. So doubling the number from 1880 to 1900. And then from 1900 to 1914, again, so pre-Balfour Declaration, it went to 85,000. So this idea like they were not really migrating, it was a failure. You literally went up 300%, 400% in a matter of like 3 decades.
Well, I would have to check for the first Aaliyah. I think a lot of those people ended up just fucking off and going back home. I don't know how many of them even ended up staying.
Yeah,
I would have to check. But like, I'm not saying that there was no migration. I'm just saying that compared to it was, I think 1917 afterwards is when a lot of people
comparison is irrelevant. If there's a 400% increase of a population in your area and they're expanding significantly, it's very obvious what's going to happen. So this is pre-Balfour Declaration in your area in the Ottoman Empire, and you're going, wait, what the hell's going on? Why is there 400% more people coming in, taking over the land, again, buying from each other only, working with each other only,
sure,
and being like, okay, this,
people.
This,
People are coming in. But at that point, I mean, they really have no right to complain, especially prior to 1917, right? It's because that all happened under the Ottoman Empire, right?
Yeah. I'm not trying to say like. Sure, we could say like the Ottoman Empire should have stopped them.
And then also we keep saying like 400% increase in Jews. The percentage of Jews are increased, but there were hundreds of thousands of Arabs living there even in the early 1900s, weren't there?
Yeah, like 600,000.
Yeah. So like when you say like increased 400%, they're still less than like I think 20%.
No. I'm not trying to say like they're sure. they're the majority, but when they're coming in, what I'm trying to say is this all points to a very obvious fact that they came in with intention, right? We can do the whole Theodore Herzl bullshit and the WZO and all that stuff, which is their intention was to come and take over land and set up a state.
Yeah, 100%.
From the get-go.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what they want. That's the point of the Balfour Declaration is like we want a state in this area. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you going into a place, whether the Ottomans own it, whether the Britons own it, whether Palestinians live there, you are going in there with intentions to disrupt people's lives. There's no way that you could go into somewhere and go, listen, I'm going to go into Africa and I'm going to set up a state. I have no intention to hurt anyone or bother anyone, or that is delusional.
Well, I don't think anybody's ever said that. Obviously, you're buying land and you're kicking farmers and stuff out. Yeah, of course, the people that are getting kicked out probably don't feel good about it. Yeah, of course.
Got it. So now we're getting this intention of they're starting to, and this is what Ben Gurion talks about a lot, which he said in one of his quotes. He said, whether we buy it from them or kick them out or intimidate them, the idea was to buy land in the beginning. That's what Ben Gurion talks about. And to basically use that to surround other areas and intimidate them to basically sell it for pennies or leave.
Yeah.
And so this was a strategic play. And so this idea of building up to like 1948, where like, oh, these Arabs just like came and attacked out of nowhere because they're just like, not to say that you said this, I'll be very clear, but like they're just angry Arabs and they're just going to come in and attack. It's like, no, the intention was that everyone isn't fucking idiots. They understand what was happening. They understand that the Jewish population that was coming in, not the existing one that lived there peacefully, but these Europeans were coming in and these people from around the world coming in to basically encroach on the land, take it from people, intimidate them, and take it, which is why Plan D has evidence of it being built for years of we're going to make sure that we know where all these militants are, what they worked, their ages, and they had basically people going around to villages marking down everything. And it didn't take a year.
Hey bro, do you work only in Lightroom? Oh, no, I do probably 50% in I do like 50% in Lightroom and like 50% in Photoshop. It kind of depends on whether it's like I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, like a photorealistic job or a creative job, where I can sort of show a little bit more creative license with the color grading and the sort of the editorial nature of it all. But if it's like a more photorealistic commission job like this one, I'd probably do 70% of the post-production in Lightroom and then finish it off in Photoshop. But I find when it's a project, say for an architect or a magazine, I'll spend a lot more time in Photoshop sort of finessing the color grade and yeah, being a little bit more creative in there. But Lightroom and Capture One are just so good for like just smashing out projects that are just a little bit more of a photorealistic, traditional kind of concept. Do you ever need the brackets? I bracket everything, 3 or 5 shots. I always bracket, and I reckon I use the brackets maybe 5% of the time, so very rarely. But when I do use them, they're indispensable. Like, they're crucial. I obviously need them. But I just bracket everything. I call it insurance. Because quite often I might even just use a darker or a brighter exposure. If I feel like the middle exposure that I got doesn't perform as well as I'd hoped. And things are getting crazy in terms of the AI noise reduction. I know that this is like a little bit technically bankrupt. A more technical purist photographer would never do this, but we're getting very close to, like, if you wanted the most dramatic window pull, where you can see through to outside really clearly, you could get a super underexposed photo, lift that to where you need it, and then just use the AI noise reduction. We're not quite there for doing something sort of like portfolio level, but we're getting pretty close.
Year to do that. It took a long time to catalog every village in the area.
Yeah, people are cataloging stuff. Yeah, of course. But I mean, like the white paper in 39, the appeal commission in 36, the correspondences prior to this. Like, yeah,
this was not a country.
Well, no, but I mean, everybody's going to be, of course, keeping track of all of these things.
Who? Like a group of people? Like, is the city of
the
Jewish starting to keep track of New York and they keep track of their population? Why would they do that if it wasn't a country at the time? If they didn't,
because they wanted to make a country, right? Of course, they wanted to make a country. Yeah. The contention here isn't whether or not they wanted to set up a country. That's not the contention. The contention is when they'd set up that country, how big they want it to be, and was the plan from the beginning always to expel all of the Arabs? That's the issue.
Yeah. So do you know why a lot of the Arabs live in Israel today? Why they're still there? Like, why? Because a lot of people, maybe we disagree.
Because
on this or don't
Israel
disagree,
didn't expel every single Arab. I think some might have came back.
But why didn't they? Because this is evidence, not to say that you use this again, Chad, I always like to be clear. So I hear this debate of like, well, if they wanted to get rid of every Arab, then why are there so many Arabs living in Israel today?
Why didn't they? I think that they were, I mean, if the village was not like actively engaged in military conflict, I don't think they were as interested in expelling those people. And then if they were outside of like the major roads to like from Jerusalem and stuff to Tel Aviv, they probably didn't mess with them as
Okay, no, it's
military.
Much, but for the specific ones that stayed, I don't know the reason why of the ones that did stay, they didn't explicitly get expelled. But.
Yeah, so to be clear, they didn't want any of them there. And you can understand this. There's no reason to have them there if you are trying to create a secure nation, right? Like whether they're peaceful or not, you just don't want them there. And their plan was to not have them there. The only reason those villages stayed was those were the areas specifically that Lebanon had invaded in 48, Egypt, Jordan, those are the places, because a lot of people think, by the way, and this is a misconception, we can bring on the historian on this, that all the Arabs attacked. That's not true. It was actually largely just Palestinians fighting Jewish militias at the time, the Haganah and all those different militias. It was not.
I don't think
that's a very big misconception. I'll cite all those sources and send them to you.
Wait, hold on. Just to be clear, my feeling on, and I haven't done a ton of pre-48 history, is I'm pretty sure the Palestinians kind of lost their will to fight in 39. I think that the big Arab revolts that happened from 36 to 39, I think there were a lot of middle-class Arabs, like people that had money, that were influential, that ended up fleeing after that.
No, I agree.
Because the
Which
British
is why
put them
48
out.
war didn't last very long.
Yeah, exactly. But then when we talk about like who was fighting from, so you had the internal civil war from like 47 to 49, but in 48, of course, Arab states came in to fight. I mean,
so that's a big misconception. Again, I'll bring on the historian. We'll talk about this because I want it to be very factual to give the exact details and citations of everything. But that's a big misconception. It was very similar to like basically Ukraine and the United States of just kind of giving them some weapons, giving them some money, and not doing very much. And the only reason that the certain villages stayed that were Arabs in the Israeli region were those were the areas that like Lebanon and Jordan and Egypt kind of sent some and said, okay, we're creating a buffer for our own country. We're going to go in and protect a couple different villages here and there.
Absolutely not. No shot. That's impossible. Without even knowing the record, I know that's not true, because if they were able to protect those villages, they would have just taken them over. And how can you say they didn't invade when Egypt invaded the Gaza Strip and took it over, or when Jordan invaded the West Bank and took it over? How can we say that they didn't invade? They literally did. That wasn't any of their territory. They must have marched armies there, and there were armistices drawn up between all three countries, I think.
Yeah, I want to bring on the historian to actually cite to everything so we can go over this, because no, that is actually true. And not
wait, then in your mind, how is it? Why Egypt conquered the Gaza Strip, right? Jordan conquered the West Bank, right? We agree with that, right?
Oh, like later on, yeah.
No, in 48.
Sure.
So how could we say they didn't invade or they didn't attack if they're conquering land?
Because there's a difference between invading all the way into, because you're saying that so what you're saying is they only went into the Gaza Strip, they didn't even go into the parts of Israel.
My understanding is they went into about as far as they felt they could fight. And then they stopped.
Yes, yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and then once they got that far, they took the land. So Egypt conquered the Gaza Strip. That wasn't their territory.
But they didn't go. But they went in. But those are the villages too. A lot of those villages that had stayed were just support of those countries. So when people say like Egypt went into huge parts of Israel and they all started attacking, it was like a lot less intense than people thought it was.
I think they were pretty intense. They got farther than the Gaza Strip. They got Gaza Strip. They got further than. I think. I want to say they were close to Tel Aviv. No, I mean, like Israel was starting to ship in a ton of weapons from Czechoslovakia. They started to fight back. They were able to push back. And then where the lines were drawn, those lines that were drawn, the borders after 48, those are armistice lines. Those are where the militaries had fought up to and were chilling on both sides of. That's what that was. So, I mean, like they pushed pretty...
I'm talking about, I'm not saying within Palestine, within Israel, the partition of Israel.
Well, there was no partition at that point, right? It was just territory that...
The lines, but the lines that they had arbitrary, because those lines are very similar to the lines that we have had in...
True, but those lines weren't arbitrary. They were drawn because that's where, like, the majority Jewish villages were. That's why they drew that partition as they did, right? So, of course, those are going to be about where they defend, because that's where they already are anyway, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying Egypt didn't go into Palestine. They didn't go into Israel, the area that Israel took over at that time.
Well, hold on, but they did go into it. Israel, they didn't make it any further because Israel fought for it. These were, again, all the countries, if the Arab countries thought they could have won completely, then they would have expelled every person that came in from Europe from that place. They would have won and they would have conquered, they would have destroyed the country. They would have destroyed Israel completely. But like there was a lot of fighting for Jerusalem. I think there was fighting close to Tel Aviv. I think Egypt put. I'd have to go and check the exact like where the armistice lines went. But yeah, there was a lot of fighting that pushed a lot. They didn't stop because they got bored or whatever, but because they were satisfied with their territorial gains, and then they ended up chilling, and they got pushed back by the early pre-IDF, the Yishuv fighting forces.
But that's a big part of why there are Arabs in Israel today. And this is, again, it just repeats the point of like, and I guess you agree with this, which is like their intention when they first moved was to take over.
Which villages? Or like, do you know any cities